I have decided to tell a series of events that I had to live when I was a military man. It all started when I was 20 years old. I had just graduated as a sub-lieutenant of infantry in the heroic military school, and I was assigned to the 93rd Infantry Battalion that is located in the heart of the Guerrero Mountains, in the municipality of Talapa de Comonfort. That type of unit is called 100% operatives. That is, they are always in total operations against drug trafficking. We spent 7 or 8 months in the mountains and rested for 2 or 3 days and then again up. Upon arriving to that unit, all the officers who had just arrived were called to the major's office, who served as head of operations, and who also assigned each one a section and told us the area we were going to operate in. I proceeded to go for my equipment and weapons, as well as to meet with my section, telling the sergeants to hurry their personnel to be in condition to leave as soon as possible. At that moment, the major called us again to have a meeting with the commander of the battalion, Colonel Juan José Baranda Rivera. He was going to give us the last instructions, and when he arrived with the colonel, he commented on who would be designated to command the fixed operations base in Temescal, to which he responded that it would be the Major Lieutenant Betancourt. Immediately I noticed the disapproval of the colonel, who said that my place was Lieutenant Locadio, since Lieutenant Locadio had more field experience and had ascended from soldier compared to me, who had arrived directly from the military school. But let Betancourt take him so he can get to know the terrain, he said. It is worth mentioning that I did feel bad at that time, but orders are orders. So I went as an escort in the vehicles to take Lieutenant Locadio to his position. Upon arriving at the town, I left him and proceeded to return to the battalion, not without passing a village called Olanala before. We stopped to buy some things in a little shop to eat and continue our way. At that moment a man of about 60 years or so approached me and told me, "Don't go traveling on December 11th, the day of San Balthazar, as evil is loose on those dates." I only answered that thank you very much. I didn't take importance to him because it was just December 7th. We paid and left and 4 days passed. I was already in the battalion when the sergeant who was in the guard commandment spoke on the radio. He asked me to communicate urgently with the municipal president of Olanala. I immediately spoke and he answered me saying that some of our companions had met with an accident. Later I went to the colonel's house that was next to the battalion to tell him everything they had told me, responding to me that what I was doing there and that they better grab Homer and a platoon and Tony to go there immediately. When I got to the site of the accident, the panorama was desolate. There were some soldiers lying down, others complaining and others injured, putting their weapons together. I ordered the sergeant who was on my side to accommodate the area and proceed with the collection of the armament. After a few minutes, the sergeant reported that 11 weapons were missing, the driver was dead and the officer Locadio was nowhere to be found. The truck had left the road and fell into a stream that was approximately 40 centimeters deep. I saw a cab that fortunately only had scrapes and I asked him what had happened. He told me that they had gone to a town to buy things but that they found everything closed, so they were going back to another town. But in that a man approached them and said, "Don't go, it's better that you stay here in my house. Today is a bad day." The officer said that it would be worse if they did not find anything to buy, so they rushed to the other town, that they were on the way and felt like something had grabbed the truck by the tail, that it had shaken it and that it had thrown it into the stream. It should be mentioned that on the pavement there was no tire mark, that is, they were not going too fast, and that also when they fell they heard a barking of dogs, but nearby there was no house, ranch and no dog nearby. Then the ambulances and the experts began to arrive. There I looked at the stream and I could see a hand that came out of the back of the truck under the tire. There were the soldiers and the weapons that were needed. A total of 11 dead soldiers. An officer disappeared and without any logical explanation. A few minutes later, about 100 people came from the village, all walking with torches in their hands. In that, the man who had found me in the store told me, I already saw what happened. They did not believe and did not listen, and the bad guy took him away. I did not answer anything because I was disconcerted by everything I was seeing. Even many murmured, saying that the bad guy had taken them away, since in the town they heard how a hound of dogs had passed, even those who took the souls of those soldiers. A cold air ran through my body when one of my soldiers asked me, "Where is Lieutenant Locadio?" At that moment I reacted and sent a platoon to look for him. He couldn't be very far. In those moments the commander-in-chief of the battalion was already arriving with a bodyguard and medical personnel. The colonel ordered me to go to the base of operations with the remaining personnel and part of his bodyguard, since only a squad had been left alone, so I withdrew from the place. On the way, we managed to see a silhouette of a person, and when we passed it we noticed that it was Lieutenant Locadio. We saw the total height a few meters ahead and we went down to go see it, and what was our surprise that there was nothing but darkness. Maybe it was like 3 in the morning and we were flashing the sight, but we didn't find anything. We continued our journey, and when we reached the base of operations, the turncoat came to give me news. I told him what had happened and he told me that it couldn't be, that about 30 minutes ago the Lieutenant Locadio arrived for his wallet. He told him that he had forgotten the wallet and he quickly retired since he had left Homer down on the road, since our base was in a little cell. I asked him how he had seen it, that if he had any wound or something strange. He answered me that no, that the weirdest thing he had seen is that there were 5 dogs that were following him. By then, the fear began to take over everyone, because there were many things that did not make sense, so we chose not to get off the vehicles and not sleep until dawn. Already at dawn, the head of operations talked to me on the radio, telling me that he was on his way to leave me 2 platoons to complete the section and that I was going to stay as commander. We were at that base for about 3 months and every day we talked about what had happened that night, also that we saw Lieutenant Locadio walking on the road alone, and what the turncoat had told me that he had gone for his wallet and the dogs. During those 3 months, the personnel of the troop told me that at night they saw as shadows in the football field that had the base, but one day on Tuesday I remember a soldier named Samuel, to whom we nicknamed the Parca. He told his sergeant that a lady at night approached him and told him that he was coming to say goodbye. We were very careful because where we were had become a place touched by the bad guy, and after this he left. We asked him how he was and he only answered that he was very pretty and very kind, which we found strange but irrelevant. The next day he ordered me to move the vehicles to a place called San Juan Puerto Montana, which is a town in the municipality of Metlatanag in Guerrero. The main objective was to find and eliminate poppy plants, and in this part of the experience I get more terrified by the events that I lived next to my troop. It was a hard day to move to the point where they had ordered me. It was really a very drastic change, since the place where we went the climate changed radically. From being in a temperate climate we reached a cold climate, where it was raining all day and there were few sunny days. In the mornings, on top of the hules that we put on the country houses, they woke up with a layer of ice, and there was also a lot of fog in the sight. I still remember the rich coffee smell that the cook made in the morning with cinnamon. They were relatively quiet days, but with a lot of work, and there were many ravines infected with poppy plants. The base of operations was located at the top of a pine tree, and at the slopes of the hills that were in the town of San Juan, Puerto Montana. This was already stuck in the limits of Oaxaca and Guerrero. To one side of the town was the Pantheon that we could see perfectly, since it was barely 150 meters in a straight line. One morning, when I was getting ready to go out to recognize, a sergeant called me, Juan Amaya, telling me to accompany him, and so I did. On the back of our camp we found something like a pure stone altar. It was about 1.5 meters and was in the form of a pyramid. Above the stones there was blood and chicken feathers, but nothing of meat or pieces of the animals sacrificed more than the beaks of the birds. We were astonished and no one said a word, It only had to say that we were still with the job and that we were not paying attention. It was Saturday and the plan was to arrive more or less early from the recognitions to be able to rest and take it on Sunday as a day of recovery, so the staff could wash and clean the armament. We arrived at about 3 in the afternoon and it started to rain and lower the temperature very quickly. We all changed and got dressed to go into our country house, and thus protect ourselves from the rain and the cold. In my country house I had a radio which I turned on and lay down, falling asleep. I really don't even remember how much I slept. I only woke up when the end of the shift to which we called Parchies shouted at me to tell me that something strange was happening to Soldier Parker. We nicknamed this soldier like that because he was extremely skinny. I immediately left and the health soldier was checking the pulse and vital signs, and the soldier had his eyes somewhat lost. As soon as I saw him, I said, "Parca, what do you have?" His eyes turned to see me and he sat down, taking a lot of air, and he said, "I'm fine, Commander." I just couldn't wake up. We watched him all night and everything was normal. The next day I sent him to talk and asked him what had happened. He replied that the silhouette of a woman put herself next to him and that she wanted to get up and that she did not let him, that the woman put her hand on his chest and told him not to stop because there was danger. I just told him that that was probably a nightmare and that he didn't have to worry anymore. At nightfall I met the section to have a talk and give instructions for the next day, and after this we went to sleep. I was already very sleepy when I heard a burst of shots. Immediately I heard that my section proceeded to establish the defense plan. I went dragging myself out of my house of campaign and yelled at the captain in turn to tell me who had fired. He told me that it had been someone on the west side of the base, so we waited 5 minutes to see if the shots continued. We waited and all we heard was the cold air that passed through the branches of the pines. I put together a platoon and went to see who had fired. I arrived and lit my lamp where the watchman's post was, and there I saw him sitting with his arms between his legs and loaded on a trunk with his pants all urinated with urine. It was the soldier Parca. I spoke to him and said, "Parca, what do you have?" He only raised his hand pointing to the pantheon that was in that direction. I lit and saw 3 dogs walking and in that they turned and their eyes lit by the light of the lamps. I just turned to see the park and I said, "How are you so scary?" That's how you see the eyes of dogs when they light up with a lamp. When I finished saying this, simultaneously one of the animals put on 2 legs and then started walking in a human way. I couldn't believe it. I didn't really know what was going on and I couldn't even know if what we were seeing was real. There was no doubt that that 4-legged creature had got up and walked 2 feet in a human way. Rather, it was walking step by step and its appearance was more like that of a current dog, and when it turned to see us, it walked towards the pantheon. It wasn't something logical and much less something natural. The fear took over us and we were left immobile, unable to say a word. I finally could move and load my gun to point it at the creature. I fired the gun and only heard a click, but the cartridge did not hit. I recharged and the cartridge came out of the chamber, shot to one side and again heard a click. Suddenly the hand of one of my sergeants who was next to me put it on the gun and said, "It's useless, Commander. It's not going to shoot. Let's get out of here." I lowered the gun and we headed back to the camp and I remember that the platoon's comrades stopped it and took it with them. When we got to the camp, I told the sergeants to gather all the firewood possible and make a bonfire, and that we made a circle with our backs to the light sitting and waiting for dawn. We were all silent without saying a word. As soon as the first rays of the sun began to appear, I spoke to the transmission cable Parca, since that is how the transmission cables are known in the army. He asked for a conference with the chief of operations. I told him, and immediately he turned on his radio and began to call the battalion. After half an hour, the head of operations answered. I answered, "Good morning, here Castillo reporting. I request to relocate myself by my own means to another area, since the plantings are far from where I am. Although that was just a pretext to leave the site. They gave me the authorization and we immediately proceeded to raise the camp and organize ourselves to leave there. I was restless and impatient about what I saw because I didn't know if it was real or not, so I told a cab that he would gather his squadron. Since he gathered his squadron, we went towards the Pantheon where we had seen the dogs. It was already day and in fact, from the few days in which the sun had risen to everything that remained. The landscape in the mountains looked beautiful, and when we reached the banks of the Pantheon I told the cab, "Let's take a walk and see what we see." We passed the Pantheon and noticed that it looked like total abandonment. In that I saw that a soldier crouched and picked up something. The cop yelled at him to leave that and better not touch it, so I went to see what I had picked up, and seeing what was on the ground, it was as if an ice block had fallen on my back. There was the subtenant's wallet and the occasion. We quickly left the place wondering how he had gotten there. It should be mentioned that where they crashed where we were was approximately a day and a half on the way by car. There was no logical explanation as to why we were finding the wallet in the Pantheon. I arrived at the camp and the people were ready, so I ordered the sergeants to start moving towards the new coordinates I gave them. On the way we found a truck that sold fruits and vegetables that was stuck. The driver asked for our support and we gladly helped him out of the truck. That driver was of indigenous appearance and very kindly asked us, "Where are you from, gentlemen?" I answered that we came from the little town that was behind that hill. He was a little thoughtful and told me, "And did you not hurt them?" "How did I hurt him?" I replied. "It is that in that town there is a lot of witchcraft. That is why almost nobody comes to these places more than those who plant bad grass. Be very careful. The people who have come here always carry something bad with them." My mind kept going around trying to join the ends of what was happening, when I suddenly felt that we were already reaching the meeting point where we were going to establish ourselves. 3 months passed since that situation, and for many of us we were already beginning to overcome it. One night I gathered my entire section. We were around the campfire and it was very cold. We all had coffee with animal cookies since there was no more in the camp. The night was normal until we heard a growl from afar. We thought it might be an animal, since we could hear the existence of a supposed real onza through the zones. I told the staff to be careful when it was their turn to guard. We went to sleep and turned on my radio to listen to the night news, which could barely tune into the AM frequency, and at one point or another I fell asleep. The next day, the time to get up was 6 a.m., but I realized that it was actually 9 in the morning. I stood up, angry and ready to scold the end of the shift because I had not got up as the order said, and to my surprise, we had all fallen asleep. Absolutely no one had woken up. The guards, the people, no one woke up, and the strangest thing, the alarms we had on the clocks did not ring. I started screaming that they get up, and I saw that on top of the Maseka ribs was lying the chief of staff, the famous Parchis. I called him and started scolding him when a sergeant gave me part of the fact that the soldier was missing to the park. Immediately I sent his platoon to look for him, thinking that he had perhaps gone to the bathroom, while I asked the chief for explanations why he had fallen asleep, answering that he did not know why and that the guards had not realized either. We practically spent all night without surveillance. It took a while and they returned to look for the soldier in the park, giving me part of that there was no trace of him. Then I decided to grab 2 pelotons and leave one at the base to continue looking for him. The weirdest thing is that his equipment were still at the base, even his boots were there, and it was impossible that he had gone barefoot. We looked for him all day, and at night we returned to the base shooting at the air several times, to see if he was located, and returned with the sound. We went to bed so that the next day we could continue with the search. Like that of 5 in the morning we had breakfast and went to look again for the boat. We hoped to find it, although my mind already imagined the worst. We all wondered how it was possible that no one had seen it when it had left, or how we all had fallen asleep without being able to wake up. Again, all our efforts to find our partner were in vain, since we didn't even find a trace of him. We arrived at night to wander the floors and tell him about broadcasts. If tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon we don't find him, I sent a radiogram saying that the park soldier left the base for operations. That night felt unusual cold in the environment. I don't know if it's because of the worry or the fear that I touched our thoughts again. I entered my camping house and I went to my sleeping and I started praying that wherever the park was, it was fine. The hours passed and I couldn't sleep, so I left the camping house and went to the campfire where the end of the shift was. I asked him to put me a little water for the coffee. He told me that he was already ready because no one had taken it, so I drank a little and lit a cigarette. The cabo was called Gallo and that's what we called him, and he started telling me that his family was from Chilapa de Alvarez Guerrero, which is a municipality that is also located in the region of the Guerrero Mountains. There was a lot of talk about stories of inaguas, charms and witchcraft, that was the people of that region, and so we were talking for about 2 hours until I told him, "Well, Gallo, I'm going to sleep and we're on the lookout." I went back to the camp and I don't know how long it took, but suddenly I heard the alert voice. I said stop shooting. I went out and asked the captain what was going on and who was in the slum. So I took my gun and together with 2 more soldiers we went to see what that noise was doing. Meanwhile, the personnel was already implementing the defense plan. We took the lamps and went to the site and the soldier ran the park totally naked and all scratched, shouting in fear. A soldier managed to throw him and his sergeant came with a blanket to cover his body, since he was scratched as if an animal had attacked him. I had heard many times stories and horror stories, but in some way I never believed them at all. I was somewhat skeptical of those beliefs, and until certain moments I would hide them as unreal or invented stories, but that would disappear with the facts that I am telling you. I was there living and seeing in my own flesh along with my section all those facts, that I would dare to say were supernatural, illogical and inexplicable. We were finally able to calm the soldier down so much that an element of health injected a diazepam and caused an effect in about 15 minutes. I gathered my sergeants, of whom 2 had been since the accident of Lieutenant Locadio. We began to talk about everything that had happened since then, each one of us giving his version of the facts. We came to the conclusion of sending a common sense slap element to compare to several religious things, and thus could lead to bless. We sent to a cab with the order to bring what we had talked about, and the next day, more calmly, we met with the soldier La Parca to ask him what had happened. The soldier was a moment in silence and with his eyes lost as if seeing something that did not exist, commented, "I do not know at what moment I woke up and I just saw myself thrown in a place I did not know, and on my side was Lieutenant Locadio. He was back to me and told me not to move. I didn't listen to him and ran away, and it was at that moment that I felt like something was taking me from my neck and throwing me down. I couldn't see that, but I felt that I was scratching. The pain was so strong that I felt like I fainted, and I could only hear that Lieutenant Locadio screamed, 'Leave him, you already have us.' From there a woman's voice commented that she still needed more. Then I woke up naked and I was in a ditch full of animal bones and red slats. From afar I could see the base, so I started running in that direction, but no matter how much I ran, I didn't get there and it looked like nothing was moving. That's how I was until suddenly a man passed by in a mule and said to me, 'Don't run, son, walk, and when you get to the pyro that is there, run with all your strength and don't turn back.' I did, Commander, and the truth is that I don't remember anything else." The health guy told him to turn around to heal the wounds you have, and when he turned around, the wounds had already dried up as if they had been there for more than a week. Another strange thing is that he never tried water or food during those 2 days, and he didn't present any picture of dehydration or hunger. We waited until the afternoon and the cab came with the officer, as well as with 3 bottles of a liter of holy water. We put the crosses around the base, and in each house of the campaign we also put others, that he would pray and ask God for us, and that as soon as we could we would go to see him too. The father said, 10, give it to your commander, and he gave me a book of Psalms that I still keep. He told him to read a psalm daily before going to bed, and so we did. 2 months passed, more or less, and everything remained very quiet. Soldier Parca had already apparently overcome that episode just like us, and the activities were normal. When one day the transmission guy called me saying that a radiogram had arrived, which asked us to go to a town called Coicoen de las Flores, all this with the intention of implementing the N3 plan. We got ready and went in that direction. Already on the way and going down a roadside, we saw that the soldier in the park out of nowhere threw his backpack and got off the road with an unknown direction. We approached him and his sergeant asked him where he was going, and the soldier in the park answered, "He's calling me, he tells me to go," but again he had a lost look and his appearance was that of a very sick person. We had no idea what was happening to him. I had always thought that people possessed or in contact with evil were bad people, or at least people who were just looking to hurt, but that was not the case with my soldier La Parca. He was a cheerful, extroverted, enthusiastic person and he always came up with some funny stuff that made us laugh a lot. He was a very reliable man and even a gallant with women, but all of that disappeared, becoming a quiet and lonely person. Since he disappeared those 2 days, I've been in a position to never leave him alone, and especially at night, he was a watchman on one side for anything. That day that he lost consciousness again, the crew of his platoon stopped him and pulled him back to the road. He was fainted for about 5 minutes, while the health guard put alcohol shards in his nose for him to react. These caused an effect and he opened his eyes, but his appearance had changed. He had a face of evil. He began to say that he was the Lord of the 7 evils who created and destroyed everything he wanted. At the same time, he was stopped by 3 soldiers of his legs, arms and head, and from one moment to another he fell asleep again. But this second time he stopped breathing and had no pulse, so the health guy started giving him cardiopulmonary respiration. He had fallen into a halt and his lips began to take a purple tone. Our friend the Parca was going away. But thanks to the health guy's expertise he managed to react thanks to the mouth-to-mouth respiration. The strange thing is that when he woke up he was worse. We were 6 soldiers and we couldn't contain him. Someone took out a blanket and a piola and as we could we wrapped it and tied it up. It was already very worn out so I told him about transmissions and I told him, "Traca, I want an urgent conference with the major doctor of the battalion, please." In a matter of minutes the major was listening to the radio. We explained what happened but obviously nobody said anything about what had happened, because they were going to tag us like crazy and we could even get into trouble. The mayor told the health worker to inject him 3 millimeters of diazepam, to which he told him that this was no longer possible because he was 6 millimeters and another dose would be fatal. Then the mayor told him to cause him to vomit, which was perhaps something he had eaten, but we knew very well that it was not so. But the health worker replied this time that he had given him water with salt and nothing, there had been no effect. "Canalize it and I'll go there immediately. Try to keep it stable," mentioned the major. That's what we did and during that time the Parca woke up and slept, but whenever it woke up it did it in a demonic way, saying that everything that surrounded it would be eliminated. It fell 3 times more in respiratory arrest, but fortunately the 3 times we managed to return it. It took about 6 hours and the major came to the battalion. They lowered the stretcher and as we could we put it on her and in that she pulled the Parca and told the doctor. "They'll never get there." The doctor only laughed and said, "It was good what this guy got into, right?" Although he really ignored the antecedents. They took us to the park and we saw how the vehicles were moving away. We all stayed with some inner peace and continued our way. However, it hadn't even been 10 minutes when he told me, "Commander, the doctor wants to have a conference with you." I took the radio and said, "Betancourt, listen to it." "Go ahead," Boss. Betancourt, I need you to go back to the Homer ambulance because it got broken. I looked at my face with several companions and said that we were on our way. We got to where the Homer ambulance had broken. The driver commented that this was the last climb to grab the Chilpancingo highway, but every time he tried to climb it, the vehicle was turned off. In that the Parca said, I already told them that we are never going to arrive. The angry doctor only said that they cover his mouth. It was already getting dark and we couldn't do much, so Sergeant Amaya approached me and said, Commander, come on, let's go to the Parca and look at it. The park was as if nothing had happened and he was calm. Also, his appearance was normal, so I asked him how he felt. He just said to me, Commander, I want to ask you a favor. In my wallet I have a stamp of San Gabriel Caballero. Can you read it to me, please? Of course I did, I replied. I read the stamp and then he fell asleep. So I told the driver to make the last attempt and turn on the Hummer and go. He did it and climbed the hill without problems, and we saw how they were moving away from the lights of the vehicles, taking our partner with them. Behind had been the uncertainty of what had been happening, since the accident of the 11 dead soldiers, not finding the Lieutenant Locadio, the dog that walked in a human way, and the disappearance and transformation of the park. So the months passed and finally the long-awaited radiogram arrived that they were going to relay to us. We were finally going to have a rest. After several months in the mountains, the section came to relay to us and came to the command of the infantry lieutenant Alberto Rochin. He proceeded to deliver the charges and the topographic cards, and the next day at first hour he went out towards Talapa de Comonfort. We arrived at the battalion around 6 in the afternoon and went directly with the other sergeants of the Sanidad platoon to ask what had happened to the soldier La Parca. There was the Sanidad sergeant and Captain Cabrera. After greeting them, I asked them what was the situation with La Parca. They answered that he had been diagnosed with multiple chronic schizophrenia personality, that he had been sent to Mexico and that from there he was made available to his family, since La Parca was originally from Talapa. We investigated my soldier's home and they provided it to us with pleasure, so we changed our civil and went to see him. On the way out we found the Parchis Cape, who also joined us to visit our partner. On the way, the Parchis told us that one of the soldiers who was escorting the park towards the hospital told him that as soon as the chimpanzee and the bear arrived, he began to put himself in a critical situation, since the park began to threaten the doctor that if he did not let him go, he would regret it. However, the mayor took little importance and only began to laugh. We arrived at the park's home and it was a humble little house with a large patio and very large fruit trees of mango and oranges. We touched the entrance and an 8-year-old boy was seen and we asked him about the park and the boy shouted, "Grandma, look for my uncle." A woman of advanced age came out and said, "What do you want here?" We answered that we were only coming to look for our partner. She responded, "Get out of here. You are the ones to blame for my grandson being like this. You didn't listen and didn't believe the warnings you were given, and now my grandson is paying the consequences." At that moment, at the entrance of the house, the park stopped and we were left watching and he just made a smile and got in. We left the place and when we turned to the corner we reached the child who received us. He had a sheet that said the Parca he gave us. The sheet said the following: "Commander, thank you very much for coming. Say hello to all the companions, but for your safety, don't come back here anymore. I'm contaminated with Pantheon soil and dead powder." And that was all the letter said. We arrived at the battalion and when I entered my room, the officer called me the commander-in-chief, who asked me to introduce myself immediately with the colonel. I went quickly and entered the commandant's office and there the colonel was sitting reviewing some papers and he told me, "Enter." I stood firm in front of him and told him to order me my colonel, and he answered me, "How strange was the whole case of your soldier, don't you think? They did all the blood tests and nothing strange came out, also tomography, nothing. The only thing they detected was an umbilical hernia that was not at all risky or that endangered his physical integrity. "That's right," the colonel replied. "Look, Betancourt, throughout my life as a soldier I have seen and lived many things in this environment, just like he had the same face you have right now. It's one of the many dangers we're exposed to, but all that's left is to stick to God and what protects us. There's no other way. Many people, if you tell them what happened, will drive you crazy, or worse, they can even put you in the psychiatric ward, and that can affect your military career. I advise you to continue with your life as if none of this had happened." I didn't know if the advice was good or bad, but I was right in some way, since it was something that goes against the laws of nature what I had lived. So I retired and went to dinner to later go to sleep. The next day I woke up the touch of the lever of the cornet and I got up to go to Diana's list. When I left, I immediately felt a heavy atmosphere. I asked the captain who was in the barracks that passed, and the commander answered me that the doctor had died. The major surgeon named Pedro was a simple and very friendly person. He loved playing basketball and was originally from Chilpancingo, Guerrero. For some unknown reason he was in a divorce process and had 2 small children. One day before they had given him franchise, and as a pretext to visit his children they gave him official documentation to deliver in the military zone. The last people who saw him were elements that were in the health platoon. They commented that he was impatient to leave and that he was only waiting for his commission office to be able to get out of the square. Leaving more or less like 9 at night in his black jet was the last time they saw him alive. The Tlapa-Chilpancingo Highway is a federal highway of a single very dangerous lane, since it is full of batches and very closed curves. There were curves that were almost 180 degrees, or in his case he had to stop for another vehicle or a large truck to pass. It was also dangerous since they were assaulted many times. It was almost once that a passenger truck was stopped and women who were going inside were raped, including the wife of a sergeant, so we were recommended to travel by day there. It was approximately 3 in the morning that they notified the battalion of the doctor's accident. It was about 2 hours before arriving in the Chilapa municipality in a L-shaped curve, where the doctor's vehicle fell approximately 200 meters from the mountain cliff. The experts arrived and commented that there were no traces of tires on the vehicle or another vehicle that could have lost control. In a few words, he just went off, and when he got off, he started burning himself, dying of a fever in that place. In the photos they took, it was clearly seen how the body was totally feverish. I didn't go to the funeral because I didn't feel like seeing more deaths. In the afternoon of that day they read a particular order and were calling officers to perform a special forces course, so I signed up and went to compete. I was 4 months out of the battalion doing the different courses. When I arrived in Tlapa I found that my unit change had already arrived. I said goodbye to my section and my staff who somehow were part of my family during that period of time. So I left everything behind and mentalized myself a Baron and new account. I was in the 21 Infantry Battalion in Cuernavaca, Morelos, and I was dining in a restaurant when I saw the news that a helicopter of the Air Force had crashed into the mountain of Guerrero. I finished dinner and went to the battalion and entered the commandant's office and took the internal phone where they communicate between battalions. I spoke by phone and a writing sergeant called Oscar answered me and I greeted him. "What a miracle, Commander. How did